I'll never do a three-way merge again.
Just one and done, huh?
But it was worth the effort.
Welcome to the AEC Growthcast from PSMJ Resources, hosted by President Gregory Hart. This no theory, no fluff episode shares real takeaways from the top AEC experts who know what works in today's competitive market.
Hello and welcome to the AEC Growthcast. My name is Greg Hart, president here at PSMJ Resources. So glad to have you here with us. The AEC Growthcast is a podcast that we developed that's for AEC firm leaders focused on growth, whatever that may be, whether it's financial, cultural, personal development-wise, whatever growth is, we're going to cover it here in the AEC Growthcast. It's been a busy May here at PSMJ Resources. Our compensation data is about to be published any day now. That's our annual survey on all things compensation for AEC firms. Our AEC Talent Max conference is happening at the end of the month. That's all things recruiting, retention, engagement, learning and development, knowledge management. So that's got us all abuzz about the people side of AEC. We've also released our AEC quarterly market forecast, which looks at proposal activity for architecture engineering firms, what client markets are up as far as proposal activity goes, which ones are down. If you're a PSMJ Pro member, by the way, you'll get that. It's already in the PSMJ Pro portal. If you're not a PSMJ Pro member, it is. We'll put a link in the show notes of how you can become a PSMJ Pro member to access that content. Okay, we've got a jam-packed episode, so we're going to get right into it here. First segment is always our metric of the month. This month, we're going to talk about compensation because, like I had mentioned, we have our annual compensation survey results getting published any day now. Maybe they're already published by the time you're listening to this episode. So the metric of the month is one number. That number is 74340. Another way to say it would be $74,340. And that number represents the median annual salary for entry-level structural engineers in the 2026 AE compensation survey from PSMJ. $74,340. That's just base salary, no incentive compensation in that. For some sense of comparison, that's up from $72,000 in the previous year. The structural engineers up on the list. I suspect a part of that is the hyperscalers in the data center space that are pushing demand, obviously, for electrical too, but structural is probably getting a little bit of a tailwind there. It's also just a market that supply and demand, and finding good talent is hard. Lower supply pushes up demand and pushes up prices. So there's a little bit of that going on. As far as what you should do with that data, wouldn't argue just throw more money at your structurals and everything's all good. Many studies over the years have shown that just throwing money at folks really doesn't do anything. In fact, a lot of studies have shown that it's things like recognition, career development, achievement, things like that. The folks value much higher than compensation. But that doesn't mean you should just ignore it. That doesn't mean you should just forget about it. You need some sort of sound compensation strategy. And that strategy, for example, might look like, hey, we tend to pay above market salaries and maybe even a little bit below market bonuses. But that fits our firm because we're a high growth organization that we generally invest significantly back into the firm, right? Whether it's through acquisitions, software development, things like that, that we're investing in the growth of the firm. So we're paying a little lower on the bonus, but making up for that in salaries. The opposite is true too. If you're kind of a lower growth firm, you might say our strategy is a little lower on the base salary, but a little higher on incentive comp. The important thing is to have some sort of strategy. And not just be winging it. Winging it creates a scatter plot of salaries in the firm. Some people are high, some people are low. No correlation to performance, to location, anything else. Is just sort of reactive to what are we going to pay to get somebody in here. That's not a sustainable strategy. So think about how do we conduct a true benchmarking exercise to articulate why our salaries are what they are, because those questions obviously always come up. Employees are likely to come into your office any time of the year and ask why they're paid what they are. Oftentimes assuming that they're maybe underpaid a little bit, right? So you have to have that strategy and benchmarking data too to be able to back that up. You also, look, you have to stay competitive. I mean, it needs to be market-based for sure. It needs to tie to your fee structure as well, right? If you're boosting up salaries, you got to make sure you're doing the same on the fee side so you can keep your achieved direct labor multipliers and keep profit margins where they need to be. Salaries going up, fees stay the same. What happens? Profit goes down. And that's not a sustainable strategy. So we'll put a link to the comp data in the show notes. Feel free to go in there, take a look. It's always lots of great data in there, lots of great insight beyond just compensation as well. So check that out. Moving on to our guest interview of the month. There's a transaction that PSMJ's team was a part of that was actually a three-way merger between three organizations in Salt Lake City. I thought this would be a fantastic time to kind of start to unpack that a little bit because you don't see those all the time, right? It's hard enough having two companies come together, let alone three. So we've got a great conversation here with PSMJ Senior M&A Advisor Karl Wohler, as well as Dave Wesemann, who is now a principal with Lynk Engineers, the combined company. So we'll get into that a little bit. We'll dig into how these firms kind of came together, what they look like, and what's going on now, what the future holds in a great conversation with Dave and Karl. But with that, let's jump into that and hear what they have to say. All right. So Karl Wohler, Senior M&A Advisor at PSMJ, and Dave Wesemann, the architect of this transaction. I don't know if you want that title, but Dave was the CEO of Spectrum Engineers and is now a part of Lynk Engineers, which is the combined company of the three companies. So thanks for joining me, guys.
Great to be here. Yeah.
Thought we'd try to navigate this. I feel like for a lot of folks, two companies coming together is hard enough, and you guys said no, hold my beer. I guess we'll go one more and make it three. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how that came together and some of the challenges and how you navigated some of the complexities and even the integration and kind of how it's going now.
So we have with Spectrum, and delighted to have Dave Wesemann here to tell their story, a very fast-growing, profitable, successful MEP firms. Like many MEP firms, they've had all kinds of buyers knocking their door down looking to buy them, and they chose instead this three-way merger path. So delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Dave and have him tell you a little bit about this story and why they chose this path and how it's working.
Dave, maybe tell us a little bit about you and then these three companies that became one.
I began in this industry in Spectrum in 1990. I graduated from the University of Utah in electrical engineering, and I just decided to take a chance on this business, this industry. And so since then, we've grown up. When I joined, we were very small, 6 or 7 or 8 people. We began it as an electrical engineering firm, electrical only. Utah is a little bit of a unique market as I've looked around country in that full MEP firms were just not a thing. So as Spectrum grew, we saw the need to add disciplines. So we'd made some smaller acquisitions back in the 90s and early 2000s. So we became an MEP firm, but everybody still knew us as an electrical firm. And it's just hard to get that message across. But by the time we had started talking about this merger, we were about 180 employees, full MEP, technology, acoustics, with our main headquarters here in Salt Lake City and another significant presence in the Phoenix area.
Tell us a little bit about the other two firms that came together here to be a part of this.
So Colvin Engineering, a mechanical only firm, primarily had been in the industry for about as long as Spectrum, between 40 and 50 years. Colvin, very well established, great reputation, good, solid mechanical firm. They had, in the last few years, they'd added a little bit of electrical, but mainly known as mechanical. Great reputation, great people. Envision was an electrical-only firm in the industry for a little over 30 years. Again, good people. These are the three companies. We know each other, right? We'd worked together for 30 or 40 years. We had actually teamed up to do a few big projects together. We knew each other. We trusted each other. We have great respect for each other. So we just thought that, boy, this would make a lot of sense. And over the years, we'd had some talks, the kind of quick talks you have. Hey, it'd be cool if we got together. It never really materialized into anything until just this past year.
So you start talking a little more seriously about this idea. You probably had plenty of opportunities. If you wanted to just sell the company, you could have, but this was a kind of a unique approach. So you thought, let's kind of build something together here. Did you jump right into value, or is it more like, all right, hold on, how's this going to work structural wise? Or take us through some of those early conversations.
I attended my very first M&A conference back in early 2025, and Karl was a presenter, and I just learned so much. I just had no idea that all these things I didn't know. So that was right about the time we were starting talks. We had got together, and it was kind of our next generation of leaders that started talking. They just came back to us, more senior gray-haired people, I guess. Hey, we want to get together and talk. So yeah, it was interesting that first time. We got straight to the chase. We sat in a room, with a blank whiteboard, and we said, what would not make this work? What are the deal killers? Let's get those out on the table now. Before that meeting, we were like, can this work? We were very skeptical because we knew enough about each other. We're all great engineers, but we just do things differently, right? At the end of the day, the client gets the same great product from us. What was interesting for me was, number one, it's really hard to find good talent. You're growing. You can hire student interns, you can train them up, you can try to recruit and take people away from competitors. But at the end of the day, to me, merging makes a lot of sense to get that good talent, to get those well-established client relationships and things like that. But so we knew each other. We thought this will be great. We can complement each other. And so we talked about all the good reasons to get together, and again, what were those deal killers that this we won't have another meeting unless we can get this stuff on the table. And that's what we did. This took about 14 months, meeting weekly, multiple times a week from that first meeting until close. That was probably a lot of work compared to others. One, we're three firms, right? Instead of two.
Carl has commented that you could run a master class in project management. So it seems like
Absolutely.
you certainly
We had multiple teams going on different components of
Right.
the merger. And if we had not divided and conquered and had a way to report back to the executive decision-making, it just wouldn't have worked. And Carl and PSMJ team were guiding us all along the way.
I really like the idea that the second generation of folks kind of got together and started fostering a dialogue about how this might work. I think that's, for a lot of, especially smaller firms, that's a big fear they have of when and where and how to get the next generation involved. The other piece, I love that idea of kind of what could go wrong, what could break this. With three firms, every accounting software, compensation, governance, everything it's just naturally going to be different. No, you're not going to be identical. So, and Carl, you probably started to kind of get involved in some of that too, right? It's starting to figure.
It was great to see. And that is exactly their approach was perfect because, first of all, the legal and accounting advisor costs on these mergers is very significant. So what you want to do is, before you bring the lawyers and accountants in, talk about the deal killers, the things that are most important, and see if you have alignment. It's a great check to see if the merger makes sense. Org chart. Who's going to be the CEO? There's three companies. There's one CEO of the future. It was amazing to watch how well they all came together, and it wasn't a competition or a debate. It was everyone agreed on Chris right away. So the one typical big hurdle was that the comp plans were very different. Spectrum had to change their comp. You need to get alignment on profit management. How much of your profit before bonus goes to performance bonuses to non-owners as employees, and how much goes to the shareholders? You need to be philosophically aligned on that. So they were really smart about putting the most important things first, getting them on the table, getting them resolved, and then bring the lawyers and accountants in to make the structure work and tax efficient. I will tell you, there is a tremendous amount of tax complication in mergers. Spectrum is a C Corp. The other two firms are S Corps. Everyone immediately assumed, well, nobody wants to be a C Corp anymore. The surviving entity will be an S or an LLC. Well, guess what? When we did the analysis, and Spectrum was right, the surviving entity is a C Corp, because a lot of complicated tax benefits that would have been lost, R&D tax credits, carry forwards. The economics pointed us to a C Corp that may be changed in 3 or 4 years, but we're talking millions of dollars of taxes involved here in the decision. So you need really good advice on the accounting, tax, and legal side of it.
Yeah,
Sure.
I might just comment on that. What made this work is it's the way we agreed and work together. We actually said, let's all use the same due diligence accounting firm. Let's combine and agree on an accounting firm for all of us to make this merge happen. But we were willing to come to the table, start with a blank sheet of paper, and just say, let's set aside our egos. Let's set aside what each of us think might be best. Let's just take the best of what we've learned from our respective companies. Let's do what's right for the new merged company. That's what really made this thing work. And so we agreed that during this whole merge process, we would basically set up an executive decision-making committee of equal say from each firm. The other firms, they didn't want to be gobbled up. They said, let's just get together and do what's best. Let's just think about what's the best thing to do. And that was our mindset going in. And that's what kept us going.
At your size, you could have just kind of run roughshod through the process and wanted to call all the shots and be sort of the alpha in the thing, but you didn't, and you wanted it to be sort of a true partnership. So much so that folks may have noticed the combined company is a completely new name, not one of the three names or some combination of the existing firms. That was probably another one of the weekly meetings, right? Tell us a little bit about that process and how you came to that.
It was all about the deal killers. There weren't many. One was no one firm's going to be gobbled up and acquired by the other and take on their name. Okay, thanks. We got it out on the table. Let's talk about that. What does the governance structure look like when we are merged? Is there a way to make sure that everybody still has a say? At the end of the day, when you come together, you're a group of shareholders, and it's the shareholders who have the control. But we put some things in place to make everybody feel like nobody's getting ran over or gobbled up by another. But so we had those conversations early on. We said, hey, if we're not using anybody's name, what is the name? So we immediately hired a branding company and started working on a new name. At the same time, we had so many other things going on: governance, integration, all of this well before the close.
What was the response from employees, and tell us a little bit about that process? Probably a little bit of confusion at first, like, wait, what about that?
What's going on?
Yeah.
Well, I knew early on that continual communication to top people, beginning with the board and then key shareholders and all shareholders, we could not throw this out as a surprise at the very end.
Yeah.
So we had multiple internally here, and I know with the other firms, we had multiple board meetings talking about everything we had talked about and asking the question, given all this, do you still want to move forward? And every step of the way, it was yes, yes, yes. And then as it got to the end, even though you think about everything up front, there's still very hard conversations that need to be had towards the end. But as a shareholder, what's that going to look like for me? What does the new shareholder agreement look like? Am I just as protected now as I used to be? What's my compensation going to be? And so as we developed everything, we had to have group conversations and we had to have one-on-one conversations, many times, multiple times with individuals to make sure they were on board as we carried this thing through.
One of the questions we'll often ask to gauge success of a transaction is about a year later, that question of, would you do it again? Right. And it hasn't been a year yet, but tell us a little bit about, is there anything you'd change in the process, or what was easier? What was more complicated? Were there some surprises, things that sort of you thought that was just going to be a quick 5-minute conversation and it turned into a big issue, or vice
Well,
versa?
I'll never do a three-way merge again.
Just one and done, huh?
But it was worth the effort. I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad we did it with these three companies because, again, we knew each other. We knew that coming together would be great for our industry here locally, nationally. It'd be good for our clients. We just knew it was the right thing to do. It was a lot of work. But in that first M&A conference I went to, it was said that a true merger is really hard. It's usually an acquisition. And so I kind of took mental note of that. But for two firms, let alone three, it was quite the deal structure we put together, that's probably a topic for another day, but it was creative, unique, allowed us to come together in a way that met all of our needs and our clients' needs. The through merge was hard. Now that I've been through it, I've learned a lot and glad to do it again. Maybe try it with one firm, one other firm, not three at once, but yeah, it was a challenge.
You did bring a lot of people into the process because 30 to 40 were under the tent, if you will, of confidentiality for a couple months,
Right.
which is unusual but necessary because your goals were you had an amazing transition because the week after the announcement and the actual merger in early April, people all got paychecks that said Lynk Engineers on it. Pretty amazing.
We had a full accounting team, and
Yeah.
every committee we created, we made sure there's representation from each firm.
Yep.
So we had an accounting committee. What's payroll got to look like day one? Marketing BD committee. What does the client communications look like? We had governance. What does our org chart look like? And as we're building these things out, we came up with using the best of all three, but we also came up with new ideas like, hey, we're a bigger firm now. We need a little more structure here.
And you had a committee because obviously when you come together as one, you need one shareholder agreement. You need one buy-sell agreement. And obviously you're starting with 3.
Mhm.
So there were groups that needed to review and come out with the best aligned vision on all these governing documents. And
Yeah.
you mentioned that, board of directors and the leadership, you agreed, even though you had a significant share split in the valuation, you agreed to this. It was clearly not a takeover. It was a merger, a really good faith merger of 3 groups. The goal being after a year, people forget where you came from. It's people
Yeah.
looking to make the new company succeed, not where'd you come from. What's your point of view?
Right. And that is probably one of the hardest things to do. So we have a combined total now of maybe 65 shareholders to try to get every single individual shareholder and 3 attorneys with 3 companies working together to agree on a new shareholder agreement. I mean, wow. In an acquisition, it's just, the acquiring firm just says, here's our agreement and we're acquiring you. Here you go. This is what you're, but we started again with a blank sheet of paper. We built a new shareholder agreement. We had to satisfy 65-ish shareholders with input from 3 separate legal teams and PSMJ. That was, to me, the most monumental and miraculous task that we actually accomplished. So
Sure.
that was something else.
Yeah, we had good help from our internal transition team, Jared Jameson,
Oh, yeah.
who helped as an expert on buy-sell agreements. Best practices bring 3 together to one to meet the goals, and we're able to utilize our internal transition experts as well as the external M&A team, which I'm a part of.
And that was very helpful because when we came to a point where we had 3 attorneys and 3 people and 65 shareholders not agreeing on something, we could always default and make our advisor, PSMJ in this case, the bad guy, and say, "Hey, tell us what's tell us what's normal. Tell us what's usual. What would you?" And so we kind of had to pull that lever a couple of times when we say, "Hey, we're the stalemate. PSMJ, what are you seeing out there in the industry and your hundreds of how many acquisitions you do? What are you seeing out there? What's fair? What's usual?" So that was very helpful.
Take me through the client communication process because that was probably a little complicated too, right? Of trying to explain to clients that these 3 firms are now one. What did that look like? Was the response generally positive? Take us through that a little bit.
It was received very well. And this was one of those things that we toyed around with making an early announcement or waiting until we closed. Again, the advice was no, wait till we close and make the big announcement. So we did. We got it all ready. Again, with our committees, we had an up and running functional website. We had our new name and brand ready to go. So we had been talking about messaging for months,
Yeah.
to our internal employees and to our clients. It was well received. There's always some reservation, like, okay, now you're bigger. You took away our competition. We kind of liked having choice, things like that. So we would just need to assure them you still have choices. We're not increasing our fees. Why would we do that? Why would we cut ourselves off at the knees and do something like
Yeah.
that? So we've assured our clients they still have a choice. They can pick individuals here and individuals there, even with our competitors, and put together their engineering team however they want. But in general, some of the first response was, wow, that's a powerhouse engineering firm. You took the best of the best and brought them together, and we complemented each other in our project types and client pools. So there wasn't even a lot of overlap, right? We're just kind of bringing everybody together. So it was well received, and it's been a huge success. We're booking lots. We continue to book lots of new work, continuing on with our projects, trying to continue improvements on our quality and delivery and of service and all of that. We wanted to make sure this was right, not for us, but for our clients. And that's what was a big factor for us.
Sure, you bet. And 1 month in, nobody's strangling each other, right? It seems like it's going well so far.
It's going well. Part of the integration is, okay, we need to all be in the same office. And that's one thing that it's hard to do day one because you got your different lease and real estate arrangements. So, but we're working on that. However, we're going back and forth between people's offices, meeting as teams here or there, and we're virtually integrated all in one space because we're sharing space already and getting together. And yeah, it's been working.
Awesome. Karl, any other thoughts from your perspective? Your first reaction was probably, "Oh my God, this is going to be a nightmare." But it seems like it came together pretty smoothly.
Yeah, we could tell the whole thing kicked off with us. The team came to Boston, catch some Red Sox games, and have a nice little off-site team building session, and we did some work sessions, and you could tell right away that there was alignment from the beginning and a mindset of what are we going to do together. It didn't come in as factions, thinking about their position.
Well, and Karl offered to come out to Salt Lake. I said, no, you know what? We need some team building. We're just getting over that deal killer hurdle. Let's get together. Let's go to a baseball game. Let's rub shoulders. And that was a pretty good turning point when we started trusting each other a little more, when we really started to get some work done. We went to Boston for a workshop. I wanted everybody to see the workshop that I saw when I went to that M&A conference. I said, let's look at the possibilities and let's get everybody trained on how this works and why you do it. And that was very helpful. It was good.
Another thing that helped is all three firms agreed to use one M&A advisor, PSMJ.
Oh, yeah.
They could have went out and hired their own and had, first of all, triple the cost. And you could say, well, is that a conflict of interest? Well, we came in right from the beginning saying we'll be cards up on the table, neutral down the middle, and everyone will be treated the same way. We'll present a method, and the method will apply to all three. We're here to facilitate and find something that, if it doesn't work for everyone, there's no point in playing favorites. The other decision was we needed equality of earnings. We used one accounting firm. We said, we're going to drill into all three firms, do equality of earnings. We're going to use you as a neutral, objective, third-party financial firm to develop the foundational things from which we went to the team, and there was some judgment still required. It wasn't just a mechanical, okay, it says this, and you run a math formula, come out. Once you see the numbers, it comes into a judgment call. And then finally, with the documents, obviously each firm did engage their own legal counsel. One was lead to draft the documents. The other two were advising because that's an obvious necessary segregation of duties. But the marching orders to the firm that Spectrum hired, which was the drafting firm, is we don't want you drafting favorable to us. We want middle of the fairway, fair right from the start. And it was clear to everyone involved, this is all about openness, cards on the table, no lack of disclosure, and fairness for all. And that spirit is what carried this through a complicated process to a successful closing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congrats on the transaction, Karl and Dave. You both put a lot of sweat equity into that one, so it sounds like it's off to a great start. So congrats on that. Yeah, that was great to get under the hood a little bit, and I think our listeners certainly appreciate hearing that as another option for recapitalization, for tackling some of those challenges, like you said, of finding talent in securing growth. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
You bet.
Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Okay, what a great conversation with Dave and Karl about M&A and about a pretty unique transaction. Three companies coming together to form one. You might have heard Dave mention when we were talking about kind of the strategic rationale for the deal, recruiting, finding talent is a big challenge. So certainly an opportunity there to buy talent, through the acquisition, which gets us into our 5-minute fix for this episode. This is a question from several folks just in the past couple of months. And we had our AEC Business Accelerator Lab executive roundtable about a month or so. We talked about this quite a bit there. But here's the question. We've grown by about 50% in the past 5 years, but that growth is really starting to plateau because of our inability to find and develop top talent. We need new ideas and new energy around recruiting. We all sit in the room and complain about it, but nothing changes. What I see in a lot of firms is they have that challenge, maybe more pronounced than others associated with recruiting, but they're not doing anything radically differently to achieve different results. In fact, I would argue they put way more effort into business development and other parts of the firm. And recruiting, often when you look at the actual effort that's going into finding talent, it's orders of magnitude lower than the collective effort that goes into things like winning work. Now, I'm not suggesting that you cut back on winning work by any means, but what I am suggesting is you use some of that same discipline and some of that same passion that we use to finding clients to finding talent. And you can think about it just like marketing and business development. That is to say, with kind of a pipeline perspective, how many new leads are we adding to the top of the funnel? And how many are converting into new hires at the bottom? That often starts too with just kind of taking a real inventory of what are we doing now at the junior level, the mid level, and the senior level, and let's rank it. What's working really well? What's working okay? What's not working at all? So we can start to ditch the stuff that's not working at all, right? If ads on Indeed or other places like that aren't doing anything, then don't put a lot of time and effort into those and focus on the things that are working. But you really have to put a lot of effort at the entry level, even before the entry level, at the internship level. I was speaking with the CEO of a 70-person firm. He commented they have 15 summer interns starting this summer. In fact, the COO of the firm started out as a summer intern. Okay, so they are very rigorous about an internship program. In fact, the CEO pops into every single interview with interns and gets to know them in that interview and is a part of the onboarding process as well. Now, that's hard to scale up with a much larger firm, but the reality is they make recruiting much more than just an HR issue. The other thing I would argue too, one of the constraints or complaints that I hear quite a bit on the recruiting side is, well, it's too hard to get talent in our local market because insert reason here, insert excuse here. I'd say that maybe don't get furious about that, get curious, get creative too about why you're not able to attract talent. If you're in a rural market, right, we're far outside a big city. Nobody wants to come here. Get more involved in the community at a more junior level. Get involved with local community colleges. Get involved with community events. Have an open house at your office to get younger folks even familiar with a career pathway in engineering or architecture or whatever your firm's disciplines are. Firms that are in rural resort mountain type communities, they'll offer season passes to ski resorts and even have powder days if there's a really good snow day. But get creative with what would be the solution to attract people to this firm. In a big city, that's a very expensive labor market. Some of those markets, firms are starting to pay for housing for summer internships to get young professionals to come check out their firm with the expectation that they'll really kind of fall in love with it and find an opportunity to develop a career there. So think about what's the bottleneck, what's the obstacle, and how could we develop a solution? Focus on boomerangs too. A lot of you often lament that it's that mid-career professional that's the challenge. Some firms have very targeted strategies for boomerangs. They can be some of your most loyal employees, not all of them, but the ones that you want to get back, the higher value ones. Some firms, after about 6 months, that's when they find that the individual has left the firm and has had a chance to actually see if the grass is greener or maybe browner on the other side, and send out a survey to that firm. Why did you leave? What could we have done differently to get you to stay? And would you be interested in coming back to the firm? You'd be surprised at the number of people that say, yes, I would be interested in coming back, at that point, there's a conversation about doing just that. You really have to recruit like your firm's sustainability depends on it, because it really does, especially at the entry level. If we're not planting those seeds for the tree 10 years ago and building that pipeline of junior folks, then you are going to starve the firm of mid-level talent and eventually starve the firm of senior level talent, right? So think about it that way. Ask yourself, are we really doing everything we can? And I suspect you'll find that there's opportunity there. So that's the 5-minute fix. If you have a question for the 5-minute fix, submit that in one of the discussion forums in PSMJ Pro. If you're a PSMJ Pro member, what we're going to do is take one of those questions from the discussion forum and answer it here. We'll be poking around in there and grabbing from there. If you're not a PSMJ Pro member, like I mentioned earlier, with the quarterly market forecast, get on in there and take a look. There'll be a link in the show notes, and you can just go to psmj.com as well to find out more information about that. So this part of the episode, I have not mentioned AI at all, because I feel like we've been kind of AI heavy on the past couple of episodes. But even with all the buzz and all the hullabaloo about what AI can do, we're always, as long as we're all around and alive, going to need talent. Which brings me to the book of the month, which is a book that we publish here at PSMJ called Build Your AEC Dream Team. It is absolutely packed with actionable, practical examples of things you can do, with interviews from case studies from actual firms. Actually, it's not just about recruiting. We intentionally didn't call it just the recruiting manual for AEC firms, because it's about much more than that. It also talks about performance management, retention, employee engagement, all the other things you can do to really build a solid team. But specifically, there are some things I want to mention here. Compensation is not going to be the tool that gets you any candidate you want. There was a story in there about a CEO who was really frustrated because he put an offer out there that, as he had put it, had everything but the kitchen sink, including an opportunity for equity, only to have the candidate decline because of perceived risk outweigh the reward. Now, that is especially challenging if you're trying to recruit people who are actively employed. They've got to be convinced that the opportunity with your firm is worth the risk of switching. A big part of it is kind of brand visibility or thought leadership marketing. Give some examples of getting out and about and conferences and blog posts and all that kind of stuff to get visible. Yeah, I think the term used in the book is recruiting delusion. And that is to say that a lot of firm leaders think their firm may be more well-known in the industry than it really is. And a lot of candidates maybe aren't that familiar with your organization. So a lot of that brand visibility and content marketing, it's really almost like recruiting marketing to get the brand out there and get potential candidates specifically aware of the firm. Referral fees continue to be, I think, one of the most effective tools. When an employee refers another potential employee to the firm, they receive a spot bonus for if that individual joins and stays with the firm for some period of time. But those continue to be quite effective, again, because presumably those folks fully understand the company's culture and fully advocate for that. Recruiting continuously is another bit that's in there. Even when the firm isn't actively hiring, always have job postings out there, be reviewing resumes, looking at opportunities to add top talent. Creating the firm the employees want to recommend. There's a little bit in there about some of the things you can do that better articulate, I think, what people like about working at the firm to create the culture as a recruiting tool. It also talks, and this is something I'm starting to hear more and more frustration with on the part of job seekers, is treating the candidate experience as part of the firm culture, okay? Candidates are judging the firm's culture long before they receive a job offer. So it talks about some of the things you can and should be doing in professionalism, transparency, responsiveness, communication. I think if you're not really focusing on delivering a candidate experience, that's in some ways on par with your client experience and making sure that they have access and clear communication and clear next steps in the process. So it's also a little bit in there about technology. That's kind of a moving target, of course, and it's always changing, but AI tools that you can use for candidate screening, job description, drafting, things like that, especially if you're doing recruiting at any sort of scale. I think some of those tools can be super, super helpful. There's a bunch in there, and I'm sure there's a bunch of new ones coming on the scene every single day. So anyway, Build Your AEC Dream Team is the book. You can find it at psmj.com. We'll put a link to it in the show notes as well. Like I said at the outset, it's much less about recruiting theory and more about the true nuts and bolts and actual action-oriented advice. So that's all we have for this episode. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope you got some good tips, some good ideas. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, do whatever you got to do wherever you get your podcast to get the word out there a bit. We'll continue to have lots of interesting episodes planned for the summer and into the fall. If you have an idea or a suggestion for a future episode or a future guest, or you yourself might want to be featured on a future episode, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at ghart, G-H-A-R-T, at psmj.com. Would love to hear from you. That's it. Thanks for joining us, everybody.